Has your own family ever rejected you just for having different dreams? Mine did. And on that day of relentless downpour, as the gates of our lavish home closed firmly behind me, little did I know I was setting foot on a journey towards a reality that would fill my family with utter dismay. Hi everyone, welcome to Revenge Echo. Let's get started. The day I was kicked out, it wasn't the gentle spring rain that whispers of new life. It was a brutal, relentless downpour. Each drop felt like another stinging word, each gust of wind a shove towards an uncertain future. My hastily packed duffel bag, my only companion in that moment of utter desolation, grew heavier with every passing second as the unforgiving rain seeped into its fabric. "You're a disappointment, Ethan," my father's voice, sharp and cold as shattered glass, sliced through the drumming of the rain against the pavement. "A complete failure." My mother stood framed in the doorway of our opulent mansion, a silhouette of disapproval. Her arms were crossed, her face a frozen mask of disappointment, a familiar expression, one she had perfected over the years, especially when I dared to voice a desire different from their meticulously crafted plan for my life. That same look had been etched on her face the day I told them I wanted to dedicate myself to software development, to the intricate world of coding and algorithms, instead of stepping into the polished shoes they had laid out for me at their beloved Sterling Innovations. "All these years," she continued, her voice laced with a disdain that cut deeper than any insult, "all these years of preparing you to take over the company, and you throw it all away for what? Some childish fantasy of building apps?" I was 18, barely a breath removed from the structured halls of high school. My transgression? Refusing to enroll in the prestigious Wharton School, the business institution they had unilaterally chosen for me. My heart yearned for a different path, a different kind of creation. I didn't want to inherit their legacy. I wanted to forge my own. "If you walk away now," my father's voice dropped to a chillingly low register, "don't ever come back. You will receive nothing from us. No support, no inheritance, nothing." I adjusted the strap of my sodden bag, the weight a physical manifestation of their rejection. I met his unwavering gaze, a newfound resolve hardening my own. "Fine," I said, the single word hanging in the rain-soaked air. The simplicity of my response seemed to momentarily stun them. They had always expected me to crumble, to plead, to ultimately yield to their will, as I had so many times before. But something had shifted within me. Perhaps it was the years spent in the shadow of my seemingly perfect older sister, Olivia, whose every achievement was held up as a shining example of my own inadequacy. Or perhaps it was simply the overdue realization that I could no longer live a life dictated by their expectations. It was time to become my own person, to chase the dreams that flickered within me. I turned my back on the imposing mansion that had been my gilded cage, each step carrying me further away from the life of privilege I had always known. Their final, venomous words echoed behind me, carried on the wind and rain. "You'll fail, Ethan. You'll come crawling back when you realize how worthless your dreams are." But I didn't look back. Not even once. The sting of their words was a fresh wound, but beneath it, a fragile seed of determination had begun to sprout. The initial months were every bit as brutal as they likely hoped they would be. I found refuge on my best friend Alex's worn-out couch, a temporary sanctuary in his cramped apartment. To keep afloat, I juggled two grueling jobs, one at a local electronics store during the day, where I navigated the labyrinthine world of consumer tech, and another delivering pizzas late into the night, the greasy boxes and endless addresses blurring into a monotonous cycle. Every spare moment, every stolen hour, was dedicated to my true passion, learning the intricate art of coding, honing my skills in the digital realm. Alex's tiny apartment, with its perpetually cluttered surfaces and the comforting aroma of instant ramen, became my unexpected sanctuary. While my family likely attended lavish galas and high-powered business functions, I sat cross-legged on the lumpy couch, surrounded by a chaotic landscape of programming books, empty energy drink cans, and the warm glow of my laptop screen balanced precariously on my knees. "You're insane, man," Alex would often say, watching me code with a mixture of amusement and concern as the first rays of dawn crept through the window. But the good kind of insane. He didn't always grasp the technical intricacies of the software I was painstakingly building, the lines of code that held the promise of my future, but he understood the raw, burning drive that fueled me. He understood the primal need to prove myself, not to them, but to myself. 6 months into my self-imposed exile, I experienced my first significant breakthrough. A small, unassuming app one had poured countless hours into developing caught the attention of a fledgling local tech startup, Innovate Labs. They didn't offer me the millions I wasn't even dreaming of yet, but they offered something far more valuable, an opportunity. A junior developer position with flexible hours, allowing me to continue nurturing my own projects in the fertile ground of my spare time. I accepted without a moment's hesitation. It was a foot in the door, a validation of the path I had chosen. My family's company, Sterling Innovations, was deeply rooted in traditional manufacturing, heavy machinery, industrial tools, the kind of tangible business that had made my grandfather a wealthy man in the latter half of the 20th century. They couldn't fathom why anyone would dedicate their life to the ephemeral world of software, to the creation of invisible products like apps and digital platforms. But I saw a different future, a future powered by the very technologies they dismissed. While they remained entrenched in their outdated methodologies, I immersed myself in the burgeoning fields of artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, and the seemingly limitless possibilities of the digital age. 1 year bled into 2, then 3. I steadily climbed the professional ladder, moving from the junior developer role at Innovate Labs to a lead developer position at a more established tech firm, Synergy Solutions. My first major application, a revolutionary project management tool designed to streamline workflows and enhance team collaboration, began to gain significant traction within the industry. I wasn't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but I was earning enough to afford my own small, decidedly unmansion-like apartment, a space where I could fully immerse myself in my work without the constant weight of familial disapproval. During those formative years, I occasionally heard snippets of news about my family through mutual acquaintances. Olivia had seamlessly stepped into the role of heir apparent at Sterling Innovations, effortlessly navigating the world of board meetings and high-stakes negotiations. My parents continued to host their elaborate charity galas and influential business dinners, meticulously maintaining their image as pillars of the community, their lives a carefully curated performance of success and philanthropy. They had effectively erased me from their narrative, a silent acknowledgement of my perceived failure. But that was perfectly fine by me. I was too busy writing my own story, one line of code, one successful project, one small victory at a time. The true turning point arrived 4 years after that rain-soaked night. My project management app had evolved into something far more ambitious, an entire suite of integrated business tools powered by the cutting edge of artificial intelligence. I christened it Apex Technologies. When the venture capital offers began to flood in, I was ready. The years of working in the industry, of witnessing both successes and failures, had equipped me with a practical business acumen that no textbook could have provided. I knew my worth, and I wasn't afraid to assert it. The initial round of funding valued Apex Technologies at a staggering $20 million. 6 months later, that valuation had tripled. I moved into a sleek penthouse apartment in the city's vibrant tech district, a world away from Alex's cramped living room. Yet, I consciously chose to live relatively simply, reinvesting every spare dollar back into the company, fueling the development of even more innovative products, and attracting the brightest minds in the industry to join my growing team. Alex, the steadfast friend who had offered me a lifeline in my darkest hour, became my head of operations, his innate organizational skills and unwavering loyalty proving invaluable as Apex Technologies expanded at an exponential rate. "Look at us now, man," he'd often say, a wide grin splitting his face as we stood in our state-of-the-art office overlooking the glittering cityscape, a far cry from our days of delivering greasy pizzas to indifferent strangers. From pepperoni to paradigm shifts. I always smiled at his enthusiastic pronouncements, but I never allowed the intoxicating taste of success to cloud my judgment. The memory of standing in the rain, stripped of everything but a soaked duffel bag and an unyielding determination, remained a potent reminder of where I had come from. Then came the day that irrevocably altered the trajectory of my life. I was in my office, meticulously reviewing potential acquisition targets, companies whose innovative technologies could strategically enhance Apex Technologies' capabilities, when a familiar name jumped out from the list: Sterling Innovations. My family's company. While I had been relentlessly embracing the future, they had stubbornly clung to the past, their traditional business model increasingly out of sync with the rapidly evolving market. Their stock price had been in a steady decline for over a year. They desperately needed a digital transformation to survive in the modern landscape, but my father's ingrained pride had always prevented him from acknowledging the need for such drastic change. Driven by a complex mix of curiosity and a strange sense of foreboding, I delved deeper into their financial reports. The situation was far more dire than I had initially suspected. They weren't just struggling, they were teetering on the brink. They needed a significant influx of capital, and they needed it fast. Approximately $10 million, I calculated, would provide them with the necessary breathing room to modernize their outdated operations and potentially stave off complete collapse. As I sat there, the cold, hard numbers on my screen painting a stark picture of my family's precarious situation, my phone rang. The number displayed was one I hadn't seen in 7 long years, yet it was etched into the deepest recesses of my memory. My father's number. I let it ring 3 times, each insistent tone echoing the harsh pronouncements he had delivered that rainy night. "You're a disappointment, Ethan. A complete failure. Don't ever come back." On the 4th ring, I finally answered. "Hello, Father," I said, carefully maintaining a neutral tone, devoid of any trace of the bitterness or satisfaction that churned within me. "I've been expecting your call." The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like an eternity. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if he had hung up, his pride perhaps reasserting itself at the last second. Then, I heard the distinct sound of him clearing his throat, a hesitant prelude to the words that followed. "Ethan," he said, his voice surprisingly lacking the usual commanding authority I had always associated with him. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my executive chair, gazing out at the sprawling cityscape below, a testament to the dreams I had dared to pursue. "Yes," I replied calmly, a subtle undercurrent of control in my voice. "I believe we do." Sterling Innovations' headquarters hadn't changed in the 7 years since I had last stood within its imposing walls. The same cold, gray granite facade loomed against the sky, the same polished brass letters proudly proclaiming the company name, the same stern-faced security guards stood sentinel at the entrance. But I was different. The raw vulnerability of that rain-soaked 18-year-old had been replaced by a quiet confidence, the uncertainty by a hard-earned sense of purpose. As I walked through the opulent lobby, memories, unbidden and vivid, flooded back. Summer afternoons spent reluctantly shadowing my father during tedious board meetings, weekends when he dragged me along to inspect the cavernous factory floors. The endless lectures about the weight of responsibility and the sanctity of legacy. Mr. Sterling, the receptionist, a woman who looked vaguely familiar, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly as she recognized my face. "Your father is expecting you in the main conference room." I nodded curtly, adjusting the impeccably tailored Italian suit I now favored, not out of nervousness. Those days were long behind me, but out of habit. Success had taught me the subtle language of appearances, though unlike my family, I understood that they were merely that, appearances, a carefully constructed veneer. The smooth, silent ride to the top floor in the private elevator provided a brief moment of solitude, time to mentally review the damning financial figures that had laid bare Sterling Innovations' desperate plight. They weren't just hemorrhaging money, they were bleeding profusely. Their latest quarterly reports revealed a staggering 60% decline in profits. Their stock, once a symbol of stability and prosperity, had plummeted from a respectable $85 per share to a paltry $12. They needed far more than just capital. They needed a complete and radical overhaul of their entire business model. The heavy double doors of the conference room swung inward, revealing a scene I couldn't have possibly envisioned 7 years prior. My father, the once formidable Richard Sterling, looked diminished. Older, undeniably tired. Even his perfectly tailored suit couldn't quite conceal the weight he had lost, both physically and, I suspected, emotionally. My mother sat beside him, her usually impeccable makeup slightly smudged, as if she had been repeatedly rubbing her weary eyes. Olivia, my older sister, stood by the panoramic window overlooking the city, her silhouette heavier than I remembered, her face slightly puffy, a telltale sign of too many stress-induced business dinners and sleepless nights. The golden child didn't look so golden anymore. "Ethan," my father said, his voice lacking its usual booming resonance as he stood up. He extended a hand, a gesture that felt both foreign and hesitant, then seemed to reconsider and awkwardly pulled it back. "Thank you for coming." I took a seat at the opposite end of the expansive mahogany table, deliberately placing my expensive leather briefcase carefully in front of me, a silent declaration of the power dynamic that had irrevocably shifted. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries, shall we?" I said, my gaze sweeping across their anxious faces. "I've seen your numbers." Olivia turned sharply from the window, her face flushing with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "You've been spying on us?" "Publicly available information, Olivia," I replied coolly. "Your company's precipitous decline isn't exactly a closely guarded secret." My mother flinched slightly at my use of her first name, a subtle reminder of the chasm that had grown between us. "We've had some setbacks," my father began, his voice attempting to adopt the smooth, persuasive tone he always employed during difficult business negotiations. "The market has been unpredictable, and our traditional customer base." "Your traditional customer base is shrinking because you've stubbornly refused to adapt," I interjected, my voice firm but devoid of malice. "The world is digital now, father. Manufacturing isn't just about hulking machinery anymore. It's about smart factories, IoT integration, predictive maintenance powered by AI. Olivia scoffed, a dismissive sound that echoed her past condescension. "And I suppose you're the expert now, with your little computer programs?" I calmly pulled out my smartphone, opened a specific application, and wirelessly projected Apex Technologies' latest quarterly report onto the large screen at the head of the conference table. The numbers, stark and irrefutable, spoke volumes. $500 million in revenue, a staggering 300% year-over-year growth, lucrative contracts with a significant number of Fortune 500 companies. A stunned silence descended upon the room. You're the founder of Apex Technologies?" my mother whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. "CEO and majority shareholder," I confirmed, meeting her gaze steadily. "Those little computer programs have built a company worth more than Sterling Innovations was even in its prime." My father's face had visibly paled. I could see the dawning realization in his eyes, the belated understanding of the path I had chosen and the immense success I had achieved. He remembered, I was sure, every dismissive word he had ever uttered about technology, every time he had belittled my dreams as worthless and impractical. "We need $10 million, he said finally, the words sounding strained and hoarse. "A bridge loan to implement the necessary modernization changes. We can offer favorable terms." "I'm not interested in a loan," I interrupted, deliberately opening my briefcase and retrieving a thick, bound document. "I'm interested in acquisition." The word hung in the air like a sudden clap of thunder, the implications heavy and undeniable. Olivia pushed herself away from the window, her face contorted with a mixture of shock and outrage. "Acquisition? You want to buy us out?" "Your own family." A wry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "Wasn't it you, Olivia, who so pointedly told everyone at your engagement party that you were an only child, that you'd never had a brother?" She recoiled as if struck, caught completely off guard by my knowledge of that deeply hurtful, public dismissal. "Ethan," my mother began, her voice taking on the pleading tone she used to employ when trying to cajole me into studying business textbooks instead of losing myself in lines of code. "Surely we can work something out. We're still your parents." "No," I said firmly, the years of their emotional manipulation having finally lost their power. "You forfeited the right to call yourselves that 7 years ago. This is purely business." I slid the thick contract across the polished surface of the table, the weight of the legal documents a tangible representation of the power I now held. Apex Technologies will acquire Sterling Innovations for $25 million. That is, frankly, more than generous given your current market valuation. We will retain the majority of your workforce, modernize your outdated facilities, and seamlessly integrate your existing manufacturing expertise with our cutting-edge digital solutions. And what about us? Olivia demanded, her voice sharp with indignation. What happens to the family? I met her gaze steadily, unflinching. You will all be offered positions within the newly formed division. Junior positions where you will have to earn any promotions based on merit, not bloodline. Father can serve as an advisor during the initial transition period, after which he will retire with a comfortable pension. Mother's extensive social connections might prove useful for client relations, but that decision, of course, rests entirely with her. My father's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the contract, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. And if we refuse? Then I leave, I replied, my voice calm and resolute, and you can try explaining to your shareholders why you turned down a lifeline that offers them a significant return on their rapidly dwindling investment. Your stock will likely plummet another 50% by next week. You might last another month, maybe two, before complete bankruptcy becomes your only option. The only sound in the room was the soft rustling of paper as my father slowly turned the pages of the contract, his face a mask of grim contemplation. You planned this, Olivia accused, her voice laced with bitter resentment. All these years, you were just waiting for us to fail. I stood up, straightening the lapels of my jacket, the gesture deliberate and final. No, Olivia. I was far too busy succeeding to waste my time waiting for your failure. You accomplished that entirely on your own. How long? My mother asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. How long do we have to decide? I picked up my briefcase, the weight of the contract a tangible symbol of the seismic shift in our family's dynamics. The offer expires at midnight. Not a minute later. Midnight? My father's voice rose in disbelief. That's impossible. We need time to review this with our lawyers, to consider other options. You don't have other options, I said calmly, my gaze unwavering, and you certainly don't have time. 7 years ago, you gave me approximately 5 minutes to decide the entire trajectory of my future. I'm giving you 12 hours. I'd say that's more than fair. I walked towards the door, my hand already reaching for the cool metal handle. Then I paused, turning back to face them one last time. Oh, and one more thing. A faint smile played on my lips, a subtle hint of the satisfaction I had long suppressed. When you sign, and you will sign, I want you to use the same pen you used to sign my college rejection letter. The one with the Sterling Innovations logo. I believe it's still in your desk drawer, Father. The look of shock that registered on his face confirmed my suspicion. He remembered. He remembered using that very pen to so casually dash my dreams all those years ago. How did you? He began, his voice a choked whisper. I'll be back at 11:45 p.m. I cut him off, my tone leaving no room for argument. Try not to be late. Time is money, after all. Isn't that what you always taught me? With that, I walked out of the conference room, leaving them to grapple with their shattered pride and the stark reality of the contract that lay before them, a document that would irrevocably change everything. As the elevator doors silently closed behind me, I caught a fleeting glimpse of my reflection in the polished metal. For the first time within those hallowed halls, I saw not the disappointment they had always projected onto me, but a winner. The next 12 hours would undoubtedly be interesting. Very interesting indeed. The city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds on black velvet, a breathtaking panorama visible from the Sterling Innovations conference room. I stood at the same window where Olivia had stood that morning, my own reflection superimposed over the glittering nighttime skyline. The door behind me opened precisely on time. My father entered first, followed by my mother and Olivia. They looked utterly exhausted, the weight of the past 12 hours etched into their faces, as if they had aged years in a single day. I noticed my father clutching a small, familiar leather case, the one he always kept his prized collection of pens in. The The board has approved the acquisition, he said, his voice rough and devoid of its usual authority. Unanimously. I turned slowly, taking in their defeated postures. I had expected nothing less. After all, what real choice did they have? Olivia slumped into a chair, loosening the knot of her expensive silk tie, a gesture that spoke volumes about her uncharacteristic disarray. You've won, Ethan, she said, the words laced with a weary resignation. Is that what you wanted to hear? No, I replied calmly, my gaze unwavering. What I want to hear is the truth. From all of you. My mother stepped forward, her designer dress slightly wrinkled from what I imagined had been a day of tense and frantic meetings. The truth about what, Ethan? About why you really pushed me away. It wasn't just about the business school, was it? The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words, with years of buried emotions and unspoken resentments. Finally, my father sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to physically age him. You were too much like him, he said quietly, his gaze distant. Like your grandfather. That wasn't what I had expected. Grandfather, the visionary who had built Sterling Innovations from the ground up? My father nodded slowly, sinking into a chair. Harold Sterling was a visionary. He saw the future coming before anyone else. Back in the 1960s, when everyone was doing things the old way, he modernized, he automated, he took risks that everyone thought were insane. The board thought he was crazy. Even his own father called him a fool. He pulled out the pen case, his trembling fingers fumbling with the clasp. But he proved them all wrong. He built this company from nothing into an empire. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of regret and a flicker of something else I couldn't quite decipher. And you have that same look in your eyes, that same drive. It terrified me. Because you're not like him, I finished, understanding dawning. You're a maintainer, not a builder. You wanted the company to stay exactly as it was when you inherited it. I wanted stability, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Safety. My mother reached out and touched his shoulder gently. We thought we were protecting you, Ethan. And Olivia. Olivia was more like your father. Cautious. Reliable. Boring, Olivia interjected with a bitter laugh. That's what you mean, isn't it? I was the safe choice. The one who wouldn't rock the boat. I walked over to the conference table, spreading my hands on its polished surface. And now look where we are. The safe choice led straight to the brink of bankruptcy. The crazy dreamer built a tech empire. We were wrong, my father said, the words seeming to physically pain him. About everything. About you. He finally managed to open the pen case and removed the Sterling Innovations pen, the same gold-plated instrument he had used to reject my college plans 7 years ago. The company logo glinted under the soft conference room lighting as he placed it on the contract. Before I sign this, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I need to know. What really happened after that night? How did you do it? I sat down across from him, feeling an unexpected urge to finally share the arduous journey, the trials and tribulations that had forged me into the person I was today. The first few months were hell, I admitted, my voice low. Worked 2 soul-crushing jobs, lived on Alex's threadbare couch, coded until my eyes burned and my fingers ached. But I had something you never gave me at home, the freedom to fail. Freedom to fail? My mother echoed softly, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Yes, I confirmed. Because when you're already at rock bottom, when your own family has written you off as worthless, there's no pressure. Every small success feels like a monumental victory. And every failure is just another lesson learned, another step closer to understanding what works. I pulled out my phone again, showing them the very first, rudimentary version of what would eventually become Apex Technologies' flagship product. This was my first app. Buggy, ugly, barely functional. But it worked. And with each iteration, each line of code, it got better. Olivia leaned forward, actually interested for the first time. And the venture capital? How did you convince them to invest? I smiled, a genuine smile this time. I didn't. They convinced me. By then, I had paying customers, a proven technology. I didn't need their money, they needed my innovation. Just like Sterling Innovations needs it now. My father picked up the pen, its weight seemingly greater than he remembered. And after we sign, what happens to us? Really? Exactly what I said this morning, I replied, my voice firm but not unkind. Olivia gets a fresh start, learning the business from the ground up, earning her way through merit. Mother can leverage her social connections to build valuable client relationships. And you, father? Yes, he asked, his gaze searching mine. You get to watch your company become what it should have been all along. What grandfather would have wanted it to be? He pressed the tip of the pen to the contract, then hesitated, his hand hovering over the dotted line. Why didn't you just let us fail, Ethan? You had every right to. Because that's not what truly successful people do, I replied, my voice calm and steady. They don't destroy, they transform. They don't settle scores, they create opportunities. Everything you taught me about maintaining a business was rooted in a bygone era, but everything grandfather built still has inherent value. It just needs to evolve. 11:59 p.m. The scratch of the pen against the thick paper was the only sound in the room as my father signed away his company, the weight of the moment palpable in the silent air. My mother wiped away a silent tear as she added her signature. Olivia, surprisingly, signed without hesitation, her expression unreadable. As I reached for the now-signed contract, my father grabbed my wrist, not roughly, but with an unexpected urgency. Ethan, he said, his voice cracking with emotion, I'm sorry. For everything. I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me with such profound disappointment, and saw something new there, respect. Maybe even a glimmer of pride. I know, I said softly, taking the contract. But it's not me you need to apologize to. It's yourself. For being too afraid to embrace change, for letting the fear of failure paralyze you from trying anything new. Can you ever forgive us? My mother asked, her voice filled with a raw vulnerability I had rarely witnessed. I stood up, tucking the contract securely into my briefcase. I forgave you years ago. That's why I'm here now, saving what's left of Sterling Innovations instead of watching it crumble into dust. Ethan, Olivia asked, her voice softer now, almost hesitant, Can we be a family again? That depends, I replied, my gaze sweeping across their faces. Are you ready to be part of a family where success isn't measured by how well you maintain the status quo, but by how bravely you face the future? One by one, they nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the profound shift that had occurred. Then yes, I said. We can try. Not as the Sterlings who kicked out their son for daring to dream differently, but as the Sterlings who learned that true legacy isn't about preserving the past, it's about building the future. I walked towards the door, then turned back one last time. Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m., don't be late. We have a company to rebuild. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I thought back to that rainy night 7 years ago, the scared 18-year-old clutching a sodden duffel bag, his dreams seemingly washed away by the downpour of his parents' rejection. If someone had told that boy that one day he would own the very building he was being kicked out of, he probably wouldn't have believed it. But that's the thing about dreams, they don't need anyone's permission to come true. They just need someone brave enough to chase them, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Alex was waiting in my car outside, a knowing grin on his face. How'd it go, boss? I showed him the signed contract. Sterling Innovations is now officially part of Apex Technologies. His grin widened. And the family drama? That, I replied, looking up at the imposing building that now belonged to my company, is a work in progress. But for the first time in 7 years, it feels like there might actually be progress. Just remember, man, Alex said as we pulled away from the curb, the Sterling Innovations building shrinking in the rearview mirror. No matter what happens with them, you've already proven yourself to yourself. And that's what truly matters. I nodded, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling within me. He was right. My success wasn't about proving my parents wrong. It was about proving myself right. Everything else was just details. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, integrating the two companies, modernizing the facilities, rebuilding fractured family relationships. But I was ready for all of it. After all, I was Ethan Sterling, the so-called failure who had succeeded against all odds, the reject who had returned victorious, the son who had surpassed his father's limited dreams by daring to dream his own. And this, I knew, was just the beginning.